Welcome to episode 328 of the Postal Hub podcast. I'm Ian Kerr. In this special bumper episode to finish 2023, we have four guests joining us. Kevin Seller from Escher, David Spottiswood from Hurrican, Jonathan Bouaziz from Kardinal, and Will Simpson from Kantar, talking about a huge variety of topics. Again, to finish off 2023. Well, let's start this episode with Jonathan Bouaziz from Kardinal. Joining me on the line is Jonathan Bouaziz. Jonathan is the CEO and co-founder of Kardinal. We're going to talk about a couple of really interesting things relating to delivery. Jonathan, let's start with PUDOs and optimizing PUDO locations. This is something that comes up all the time when we're talking about setting up pick-up and drop-off networks. So what can you share with us on this topic?
Thank you, Jan, for receiving me. I think that PUDO is coming a big thing. It has been for a few years now. As companies are trying to improve the rate of out-of-home deliveries to increase the density of deliveries. Of course, PUDO is a very good possibility. But now we see that where they've developed a huge network of PUDO. But if you have a lot of PUDOs, you need to also make the deliveries, and it has a cost. So now there is, I would say, companies are trying to rationalize the number of PUDOs and try to find the best PUDO to have the maximum number of parcels to deliver, but also the best coverage. And this is a big topic.
So tell us how you can start thinking about this, how you can start planning this, because it's not just a pure numbers game, as you've suggested. It's not just about getting as many PUDOs out there as you can. It's about getting them in the right places so they've got enough parcels to make it worthwhile, I suppose, but while also being convenient for customers. So is that the kind of idea we're talking about here?
Yeah, totally. You cannot think your territory as, I would say, the same everywhere. If you are in rural areas, of course, people can take their cars and go to the PUDO. But when you are in urban area, of course, people can take their bikes or be by foot, and so you can have, I would say, a more dense PUDO network. So this is why you need to combine. You need to understand the activity based on your historical data, but if you have that coupled with the coverage of your PUDO network, you are able to do some assumption and some scenarios. And thanks to technology today, you can run a lot of scenarios to see what would be the best PUDO if you have a certain if you have a certain budget, if you have certain constraints. You can rethink your total network in order to achieve that.
So you can start with the data that you already have on PUDO in your network to start reviewing your current network and even planning for future PUDO points. Is that the idea?
Yeah, of course. Usually when we are discussing with our customers, they already have a network already in place. But the problem is they have a network in place. They don't know what will be, they know the number of parcels that are delivered in every PUDO. But at the end, they don't know if it's a good PUDO, not a good PUDO. If they just get rid of one PUDO, what will be the impact on the others? And so this is a kind of thing you need to understand to be able to take the best decisions.
Let's now talk about mail delivery and parcel delivery. We're seeing in postal organisations these twin trends almost, where you've got letter volumes declining and parcel volumes overall increasing over the longer term. So what have you seen there? How can postal operators start thinking about either merging these delivery streams or planning how to set up these delivery streams?
Yes, still in to improve, I would say, the profitability. Everybody's looking for that today. You have the OPEX, and I was talking about the PUDO, but I would say in terms of CapEx, you need to improve, I would say, your assets, your existing assets. And so they have developed, most of the players have developed or a network for the parcel and a network for the mails. And now they see that they can just mutualize some networks, mostly in rural areas, because they don't have a lot of mails, they don't have a lot of parcels to deliver, so they can combine with mails. But what we see is they really don't know how to sectorize the territory in order to be sure that they will be able to handle the volume they have in each territory. So I would say that in order to reach this efficiency, they see that there is two different networks that they can mutualize and improve their overall efficiency.
And there's a lot of thinking around this very question right now in the postal world when it comes to not just merging letters and parcels, but working out how frequently should letters be delivered, how frequently should parcels be delivered. So if you're merging them, you've got letters that might be operating on what they call an XY model. You might be have parcels that are express parcels. There are also how would we describe some operational challenges around that as well, making sure that you've got the right vehicle on the road at the right time as well, yeah?
Yeah, you're totally right. This is a big challenge for the postal operators because usually it's the law with defining when they should visit the customer, and so when you have to visit every day, even if you don't have any letters to give, it costs a lot for the company, and it has a huge impact. And so this is why merging those two networks allows them to, I would say, make their resources profitable by taking some part of the volume and give them to the people operating. So this is why I would say this is for those companies, they are really trying to rethink their model and see how often they should visit, but even if they don't visit every day, when it should be. And this is a big topic because it has a huge impact, and usually it's more in rural areas. And we know the social impacts of postal operators in rural areas. And so this is why you have, I think that the governments will put their nose in it, and they already are.
Yes, indeed. So it's really a complex problem in some respects because it's not just about the operational side of things and planning for future volume, either losses or growth, depending on the kind of delivery items we're talking about. But there's the political aspect to it. There's the regulatory aspect to it. There are all these factors that play into letters and parcel delivery, and you've mentioned the hot button issue of rural delivery as well. There was just news just the other day, wasn't there, Jonathan, about changes to the USO in Denmark, something we covered very recently on the Postal Hub podcast. So all this is all playing into the same space, isn't it? Anyway, Jonathan, I am starting to rant a little bit here. If people want to find out more about Kardinal and the solutions that you have, whether it's for postal companies or for parcel delivery companies, where should they go?
They should go on Kardinal.ai on our website. You have all the information about the use cases that we are able to tackle. It can be the sectorization. We are working with few parcel and postal operators to help them sectorize their territory, sort the packages, to define what would be the best coverage for each driver. And so this is a kind of solution we provide to this industry, and we'll be pleased to support them for the next peak now.
Kardinal.ai, Kardinal with a K is the website. Jonathan Bouaziz, CEO and co-founder of Kardinal, thank you very much for joining us on the Postal Hub podcast today.
Thank you, Jan.
Joining me on the line is Kevin Sellers. Kevin is Chief Sales Officer at Escher. Welcome, Kevin. Let's have a bit of a chat about post offices. What do you see as being the main challenges that, I like the way we say challenges these days, we don't say problems, some of the main problems that the postal sector is facing at the moment?
So I think there's a number of challenges. Most of them are very well documented. So we all know about the declining letters volumes. We know that governments typically are pushing business more online. And we know that things like bill payments are becoming much more automated and via direct debit and so on. So what you've really got for a lot of posts is large networks where they've got two big challenges. One is that it's by and large a fixed cost base. So you've got the premises, you've got the people, you've got your IT, and typically you've got cash to get around there. The second challenge is that most of them have got a universal service obligation, which means that by and large you cannot close post offices to reduce cost. And it's such a politically sensitive issue. So all of the posts have got very similar challenges, and to a degree they're trying to address them with their hands tied behind their back. And there's two options. You either cut your costs or you increase your revenue. And as we know, to increase your revenue to replace the lost letters volume is a very big challenge for the posts.
What do you see as some of the trends looking forward then? Is it more of the same, or do you think some of these trends are going to be exacerbated or increase?
I think the trends are more of the same. It's difficult to see a reversal of the digital planet that we're now living on. So I think it's going to drive more innovation. People are going to be looking at different ways to use the space, different ways to use their networks. And I think the big challenge for all of us is how do we react to that challenge? And one of the biggies is how do I actually variabilize my costs when I've got this huge network which nobody will let me tamper with? And typically people start to look at self-service, but I think we're going to have to start looking much more innovatively at things like self-service, things like unmanned post offices, and what the purpose of a post office is. Can we change it? Can we do more with it? Can we use that space differently? And I think when you look at self-service, people typically look at the big box, the big tin box that comes with self-service. And I think what we have to start doing is saying, actually, it's probably not one size fits all. Different areas, different post offices have different challenges. So I think it's looking at what's inside the automation, what's the problem you're trying to address in a particular location, and then coming up with a solution that fits that. And just as a couple of examples, I know one post where what they wanted to automate was the ability to drop off prepaid parcels. So they've got very low tech solutions. It's simply scan a barcode and drop it into a bin, for want of a better word. And that is self-service. In other places, you've got things like full screens where I can do a full self-service option. I can do bill payment. I can do some simple government transactions. I can do mails, posting, etc. So I think it's very important that we start to look at what the challenge is by location and how we can address it in different ways. And we always have to bear in mind that the big challenge with posts at the moment is I've got to be accessible, I've got to be convenient, and that means that I have to be where the customer wants me to be when the customer wants me to be open. And again, that raises a challenge, because how do I keep my cost base down if I've then got to probably increase the size of my network? So I think it's important we look at what the network's doing, and it doesn't have to do everything in every location. So, and what do I mean by that? Well, typically a post office will do every single transaction, and most posts pride themselves on the range of transactions they do, and it's huge. But you don't have to do those everywhere. They have to be accessible to customers. But convenience for things like dropping off parcels, being able to drop off pick up parcels, is so important for the customer. And the one truth is, I'm not going to walk past several other options to drop off my parcel just to go to the post office. There's no brand loyalty there. And I'm always keen to point out, we always talk about the parcels market. And I think we have to bear in mind there really is no such thing as the parcels market. Parcels are a byproduct of e-commerce. And that's what the market is nowadays. And we're just a part of that distribution chain, that logistics chain. And I think it's important we remember that, because it's all about the end customer. And if we're not convenient for the customer, then we're not going to get that customer. If we make it difficult for them to do a return, we're not going to get that customer. They'll go elsewhere. And there's two things important for them. They want to make sure they can do their return easily. And the reason they want it to be easy is because it triggers the refund. So that's what's important to the customer when they're doing online shopping now. So I just think we have to start challenging the regulator a bit more and look at some of the definitions of the universal service, definitions of what a post office is, because typically it will say there must be a post office within so many miles of every citizen in a rural area, in an urban area, and so on, and it must do the following services. And many of them say they've got to be manned post offices as well. And I think we need to start challenging that. Why does it have to be manned if I can do everything that's needed in that location? Can I use vans more smartly? Can I have travelling post offices? And can I do more with the post offices I've got? So can I start to look at maybe keeping some stock in them for some of the large retailers? So rather than having to go to a central distribution point and then send it to a local distribution point and then send it to a sorting office, it can just literally be shelf-picked from a local office and sent out to the customer, or the customer can come and pick it up. And the final point on all of this for me is that posts have to make sure that they haven't got over complex IT. So as we move more to a world of convenience and accessibility, it's going to be about simple, smaller outlets, more of them. So yes, I think posts have to increase the number of outlets they've got, but they've got to be small, simple, low transaction outlets. And for that, they need simple IT. And the one thing that people have to watch out for is that if they expand those networks, they're not left with stranded IT in their big branches, which does way more than they need it to do in the future, and that they've got the right IT in the new, smaller, more convenient network, and that it's all powered by one platform, because what you don't want to do is have different platforms running different services.
That last point, Kevin, is a great one for the postal world, isn't it? Because we have so many legacy systems and they've been developed over decades and they're still all there at the front line somehow, whether it's in scanning technology or retail technology or other things that have been bolted on because you've had a particular customer that wanted to do a particular transaction at the post office, and so you've had to build a particular IT solution just to service their needs. So yes, there's all super relevant points to the modern post office network, and we could probably drill down to each one of those things, even things like automation, how automation fits in with partner networks and how all of that fits in with opening hours and how that fits in with customer convenience. Probably a conversation we could carry on over hours. And in fact, we do, Kevin. It's probably the right moment for me to mention the International Postal Retail everybody, it's a bit of a mouthful. The International Postal Retail Benchmarking Workshop in 2023. It was held in Finland, hosted by Posti, and Escher was indeed one of the sponsors. We'll get that in now, Kevin. But it was a great opportunity over a few days for all the leaders of postal retail operations to get together and talk about exactly what Kevin's just outlined, really. I would say, Kevin, that covers the main topics we discussed in Helsinki in September 2023. If you want to find out more, everybody, go to plethora.co.uk, Plefora, plethora.co.uk, and you'll be able to find information there. I haven't checked lately, but you should be able to find stuff there. Kevin, last thing, we're talking about the role of the post office network, and something you just touched on there, I just want you to expand on a little bit, was about local fulfillment. Because there's been a couple of little trials here and there around the world for this idea of local fulfillment. What do you mean by that, and how do you see it could work in a practical sense out of a post office?
If I look at the world today, then where we started, and first of all, I would say that a lot of the private sector logistics providers have got a huge advantage over most national posts in that they started 10, 20 years ago at most with a clean sheet of paper. And so their technology is designed for the customer experience they want, whereas most posts, as you said, Ian, have got legacy systems which have been built up over time and bolted together. So what I mean about repurposing the network, and this isn't just the retail network, this is the entire estate that post offices run in terms of sorting centres and huge warehouses for sortation and so on. It's really about, can I become the local provider for someone like an Amazon? So the large online retailer, they keep all of their stock centrally. They will then typically will have it picked up in lorries and taken somewhere to be a first point of distribution. From that point of distribution, it goes to a local distribution centre and then it eventually gets sent on to the customer. Well, is there a reason why the post couldn't make use of some of the space they've got in some of their local offices and say, actually, do you know what? We could keep a range of that stock for you. These are the items that customers buy most frequently. If you actually wanted to, you could let us keep those items on our shelves. We've got the space. And then rather than you have to send it from A to B to C, just tell us when somebody in the region wants one and we'll take it and we'll deliver it to them. And therefore, you've cut out that long supply chain that goes from the central hub right the way through to the local hub. And it's going to speed up the operation as well. And we know that people want speed as much as anything when they order stuff online. I want it now. I don't want to wait for it. So that's broadly what I mean. And yes, I think some people have trialled it. I think we need to give a lot more thought as to how that could work and to look at collaboration with some of the major retailers and how that might work.
Lots for us to think about there as we get into 2024. Lots of challenges, as we like to say, for the post office network, but equally lots of strengths, I think, for us to build upon in our post office networks. If anybody wants to find out more about Escher, here's the plug, everybody. It's eschergroup.com. That's the website. Go over to eschergroup.com and you'll be able to find out. You'll be able to see how to find out more from Escher about all the products and services they have to offer. Kevin Sellers, Chief Sales Officer at Escher, thank you very much for joining us on the Postal Hub podcast today.
Thanks very much, Ian.
Joining me on the line is Will Simpson. Will is Client Director at Kantar's Postal and Logistics practice. Will, we're going to talk about a couple of trends that you've picked up on happening in the postal world, the delivery world. Let's start with regulation. Regulation, there's been a few changes happening in the postal regulatory world. What's it all about? I mean, why is it happening?
Well, it's really interesting, actually, and it's the kind of complicating of the regulatory environment between different companies. So it's, I suppose, you've got the big one, of course, Denmark, where they've got rid of the USO and brought private companies in to deliver mail across Denmark. You've also got Ofcom looking again at the USO. They only looked at it a couple of years ago, I think, and you've got Australia too that have just changed the requirements over there, and the same is happening across the world. It's really kind of, I suppose, it's companies kind of grappling with the macro trends that private companies and incumbents have been grappling with for a while, i.e. the move from letters to parcels. So that complicating, I think, is interesting in that it could, you imagine, as parcels become more important for people, parcels come into view, or say non-USO companies come into view within the regulatory kind of I suppose environment. At the moment, regulators are a bit nervous about overstepping their mind because there isn't a legal framework there, but pressure is certainly there coming from consumers themselves, from brands that are starting to understand that the delivery experience is absolutely central to their continued growth within the e-commerce centre. So I suppose seeing how different companies or different countries, deal with this kind of challenge over the next year will be very interesting. And as a bit of a plug for Kantar, maybe the visibility that our products can give will certainly help brands deliver the experience they want, and it will ensure that certain groups within society don't fall through the cracks as these kind of seismic changes kind of settle.
When we talk about the changes to postal regulation, changes to the USO, we're often talking about decline in letters, and the growth in parcels. And parcels are largely held up as being a competitive market where there are multiple operators delivering in basically every market. So you might have, the local post, you might have one of the big integrators or both of the big integrators or all three of them, you never know, and various other private carriers working in that market. So what does that mean for things like service quality and the competition that there is around things like not just service quality, but even price, I suppose?
Yeah, certainly. Well, what I would sort of argue, I suppose, is heretofore the competition within that market, as you say, it's been very, very competitive, and it's been primarily down to price. So that delivery is seen as a kind of a functional element of getting a product from A to B. What we're seeing within Kantar, and this spreads across the wider economy, actually, not just logistics, is this understanding that the experience that's delivered by a company will input into its brand in a way that will give it more purchase within the marketplace, right? So in that sense, quality becomes absolutely key for all delivery providers, not just in terms of getting it there on time, but ensuring that the data that the data that they're reporting to both their business customers, but also the address they're delivering to, absolutely key. The visibility and the reliability there will form a huge part of the competition going forwards, I feel.
It's already interesting for us to talk about service quality of parcels and things like that. But what about regulation? Do you think there's a possibility that parcels could become regulated in the future?
I mean, it's from my perspective, it's certainly a possibility. What I would say is that regulators work within a legal framework, and in the conversations that I've had, there's nervousness around stepping out of that framework. But equally, there is pressure from the market that may need to come in. So I think I mentioned earlier, you have consumer groups like Citizens Advice in the UK that report on the service that's delivered by the private couriers, and they would suggest it's very, very poor. You also have Ofcom starting to drop their toe into that area of the market by imposing requirements around complaints. I would suggest, if parcel companies don't up their game across the board, then you could certainly see regulation coming in to ensure a minimum level.
It's an interesting one, isn't it, really? When we talk about regulation, we often, in the postal sector at least, we often think about the regulation that applies for the USO, whereas the regulation as it applies for parcel delivery may be different, might not be the same as the approach that's taken with letters. Anyway, it's just a little thought for us.
It could be as simple as ensuring visibility on the service quality across different providers.
Complaints handling and things like that, where there might be a requirement for standardization. Let's move on. We wanted to talk a little bit about sustainability. What are some of the key things relating to sustainability that you're seeing in the postal and logistics world?
Yeah, well, look. So I think it's quite clear to say, isn't it? The sustainability is one of the key issues of our time. Consumers recognise it. I think in a report that Kantar produced earlier this year, something like 97% of consumers say that they want to live more sustainably, and sustainably defined very, very broadly. Then, now, of course, the challenge that's often put to that is that people don't take the actions that you would expect if they were to live sustainably, and we would term that the value action gap. So while people want to act sustainably, maybe there are various kind of barriers that stop them doing that. Often, well, especially in our current times, that can come down to money, right? So the cost of living crisis is preventing people from making a sustainable option. Now, the onus is upon companies to allow people to act in the way that they would like to, and not necessarily at a price premium. So it must be in a way that fits into their daily lives. So what you can see in sustainability is a kind of edging of a kind of fatigue around acting sustainability, but it still remains incredibly important. Our Brand Z database, it's been running for 25 years. It measures 20,000 brands, I think, across 53 markets, both B2B and B2C. There you see the continued importance and the increasing importance of sustainability around purchase decisions within logistics. So still incredibly important. I think the key insight there is that the industry as a whole is moving, right? So you have things like electrification, moving items where possible to non-flight transportation. Lockers are trading on their sustainability credentials, and that can be debated, of course. But the industry as a whole is moving. What we're not seeing within our data is any individual companies taking the lead in a way that would allow them to own that space. So I suppose companies aren't necessarily messaging in a distinctive way that will give them ROI on their innovation and investments. So that's what I would say. I think it'll be interesting in the next year to see which companies start to try and own that space in a way that isn't just delivering table stakes like fleet electrification. You do see that a little bit in some advertising and communications. So Royal Mail earlier this year came out with their claims around CO2, and DPD make big strides in the way that they communicate around sustainability. We're not seeing those brands come away from the pack in our data, though.
Of course, the way to really reduce emissions in the delivery sector is for people to buy less. but let's not dwell upon that too much.
Or become more effective in their sorting and operations, because for every missorted parcel, it will be clocking up miles.
That is something that is often talked about, sort of on the edges of this discussion, isn't it? About improving first-time delivery. So if we are delivering the parcel first time, it's not being transported back to a post office, a PUDO, a hub, a locker, wherever for collection by the consumer. But it is part of this overall delightfully complex problem to solve in some respects when it comes to the greenness or sustainability credentials of various delivery options and indeed our entire delivery operation. It is a deep question, and maybe one that will continue in 2024. I think for certain we will continue in 2024. A quick comment then from you, Will, before we wrap up. Well, let's talk about attention advertising. We did discuss this with your colleagues at Kantar and Jikmail in 2023, talking about greater measurement of the effectiveness of direct mail and advertising via mail. Can you share a couple of thoughts on that with us before we wrap up?
Yeah, well, I mean, so attention was a metric that was big in the media planning world maybe 5-10 years ago. It sort of went away a little bit, but with the cost of advertising the cost of living crisis, advertisers are starting again to pay much more attention to the effectiveness of their ads. There's a growing recognition that I suppose there are different types of attention. So the attention that you give to an internet banner ad is significantly less than you give to a print ad. So we responded to that trend earlier this year within our mail ad measurements, and started measuring the amount of time that people spend with mail and the amount of attention that they give it. And those conversations that we started, they've only sharpened, and they will sharpen more in the coming year. So the key insight that came out of our measurement there was that mail can get down to 7, in terms of the cost, it can get down to 7p per second of attention. That makes it very comparable with digital advertising, even TV advertising in some forms, given mail's kind of long life in the home and physical nature. So while we talk a lot about mail volumes going down, but there is certainly a case for mail advertising within the mix. We've started to have those conversations, and they're being received very, very, very well within the UK advertising.
I'm glad to hear that, because I look at my own situation. I open my email in the morning and just delete a whole load of rubbish, and I have an uncluttered mailbox when it comes to my actual letter delivery. Now, there's not the clutter there. There's not so much competition for my attention, I should say, when it comes to the physical mail. Well, there you go. Although I do get every week 2 or 3 flyers for pizzerias. So, the local pizza industry is very much aware of that, but they're not using the post. They're just shoving it through the letterbox. Anyway, let's talk about pizzas and more talk about Kantar. Will, if people want to find out more about Kantar, well, I mean, I'll put a link to the Kantar website on the episode page. So head on over to thepostalhub.com, find this episode if you're not already there, and you'll be able to click through, whatever the phrase is, to Kantar's website. And I don't know, maybe I'll put a link to Will's LinkedIn profile. If you want to get in contact with Will directly, follow him on LinkedIn, stalk him on LinkedIn. No, don't do that. That's uncool. Just follow him on LinkedIn. Will Simpson, Client Director at Kantar's Postal and Logistics Practice. Thank you very much for joining us on the Postal Hub podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Ian.
Joining me on the line is David Spottiswood, co-founder of Hurrican. David, as always, we're going to be talking about cross-border e-commerce. Let's start with what's happening with ICS2, because I understand, well, I'm not going to say it's all been plain sailing, but there've been some movements and developments with regard to the implementation of ICS2. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like most legislation is, it's there. People sometimes look at the legislation as a barrier, but it's actually more around enabling commerce if you get it right. And with ICS2, that was scheduled to to come in earlier this year. And that is essentially making sure, on simple terms, making sure that anything that's moving, any parcels that are coming into Europe, have all the right data so that can be identified, not just from a fiscal point of view, so duties and taxes, but it's also from a security point of view and from a prohibited and restrictions point of view, so that people really understand what's moving, into the European scenario. So ICS2 was all about not only in this context, the postal, but it's also about the airlines' involvement as well. So the actual carrier, the middle mile piece. So essentially that was scheduled March 1st. Like everything, there was a bit of a honeymoon period and the bedding in, because that's quite a feat to start checking everything and making sure that the data's with everything, etc. But really, it's from about October the 1st this year, it's really been implemented, and we're certainly seeing it from a postal point of view. Is more and more of the posts are ensuring that all of the material that they're uplifting or presenting to airlines for uplift has all the right data. And, part of that is because the airlines, I can't remember exactly, but I think a couple of the airlines, March, April, said, if I don't have the data, I can't uplift it. And that, from an airline point of view, that was more the security aspect. But, we're now, December? And, are there some delays and hiccups? Yeah, there's been a few, but all in all, it's been implemented, it's being checked, and data is becoming more and more complete. And we see it from our point of view that, any incomplete data, parcels that come into Europe at the moment before lodgement, if it doesn't have the data, happily it's passed through to us. We ensure that the data is correct, and then it's lodged into customs.
Is there anything else on the horizon, David, with regard to other legislation or regulations that will impact on cross-border e-commerce that people need?
Legislation and compliance is coming across the globe, right? So, probably, there are certainly, the eye on the ball is whether in the US de minimis will disappear. There is, things happening in Brazil with changes in the regulations there. So we often become very European centric, right? Because we're in Europe, but global trade is all about, parcels and material moving from one country to the other. And therefore you've had changes in, Australia. I'm not the expert, Ian, on this, but there are changes that have come into play in Australia. There are changes coming into some of the Asian countries. Interestingly, the legislation drive and change in Europe with ICS2 is driving Asian material now to start looking at making sure they have complete data. So I think, what we tend to do is we have almost like a radar that, by every single country that shows what's changing. We've talked about the Stop Act before, right? But it was never really enforced. But because of all the issues around fentanyl, etc., then in the US, then that's now actively being enforced as well. So, the sort of T86 entries into the US and simplified entries into the UK are all being looked at in terms of, how can data be, or parcels be moved with, absolute accuracy and complete data. And, this is where I say you've got to, it's not countries being difficult, right? It's, there should be, a level playing field with, high street shops and online, right? In terms of what taxes are charged, what duties are charged, etc. But it's equally around security. What sort of material is going on aeroplanes and what sort of material is entering country. I was watching the UK news this morning and they are starting to have the problem with illicit drugs coming in from China as well. And it's causing a lot of fatalities. So, will legislation come in around that? Absolutely. And rightly so. It is a global move to really make sure that things are monitored, fiscally charged where applicable, but for all our own good, security. You know, I want to know what's in the belly of an aeroplane when I get on the aeroplane, right? So very important.
Now, let's talk about customs. You mentioned earlier on that customs is a part of this chain when it comes to e-commerce and parcels zipping around the world. Are there any developments that you can share with us with regard to Hurricane and customs and things like that?
The border controls and the customs are, you know, there to facilitate smooth trade. But their job is to make sure that they're inspecting and ensuring that, you know, bad material doesn't get in or you know, prohibited or restricted goods aren't moved into the country, etc. But equally, in today's world, post-pandemic, it's also about governments needing to ensure that they're charging the right duties and taxes, right? And collecting it. So I think I mentioned a while back, we are working with Parsec, which is part of the EU project Horizon, which is all about, you know, looking at the data and the accuracy of data that's being provided to customs authorities. And we've started with the very first one in Europe. We'll be integrating our software into the customs arena so that they have the ability at speed and accuracy to check and screen material coming into Europe. And I think that's a great move because, you know, essentially what you're then doing is, you're really providing across the whole supply chain the same data from the same database. So the level of accuracy by nature will improve dramatically. But what it also allows the customs authority to do is, you know, these guys are having to check millions and millions of parcels, right? And the data that goes alongside it. Now, you know, and I know we've been around a bit, trying to check manually millions of parcels, forget that. That's not going to happen. So we're going to work very closely with them now in terms of screening, looking at, you know, where parcels are coming from, level of accuracy, data compliance, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very, very exciting. I mean, it is for Hurrican, which is great. But more importantly, I think, is it's about customs being able to, you know, provide or receive the right data and be able to process it at speed. Because in the end, you know, anything rejected or held or you know, returned by customs or even pre-lodgement means a cost to the carriers, right? Because if you've got to hold shipments or you've got to go back to destination or whatever, that's a whole piece of cost that comes into the supply chain. So we're excited from it, not just, you know, from the customs point of view, but our partners across the globe. You know, this will have an impact on their cost base, which ultimately you would hope will, you know, keep costs under control to the consumer. It avoids that horrible thing of, you know, your shipment, you know, you go on the tracking and it's been picked up in wherever and it's arrived in the receiving country and then it goes dead for about 2 weeks. And that normally is because they don't have the right data.
We can approach this from various perspectives, can't we? When we talk about the data that's necessary to facilitate cross-border e-commerce, we could talk about it from the consumer perspective. And we've talked about this previously, obviously, David, when we talk about the doorstep surprise.
Yeah.
And also the consumer perspective when you don't, as you just mentioned, parcels that sit in a warehouse somewhere waiting to be processed. There's the customs perspective that you just detailed as well. And then there's the post perspective and even the e-commerce retailers perspective, which goes hand in hand in some respects, because nobody wants those parcels coming back. You don't want the parcels being rejected either at the international gateway in your home country or at the international gateway in the destination country or whatever. I mean, that just adds cost, doesn't it?
Yeah, and you know, that's the sort of hidden thing that people don't really feel unless it happens to them is, as you say, the doorstep surprise. You know, you get all excited, your parcel's arrived, and somebody asks you for another $20 that you didn't even know about.
I'd say $20 is a bargain compared to what I've been slugged in the past. By the way, all international delivery managers or whatever your title might be, if you're responsible for international letters and parcels, please work with your partners in delivery to make sure that your delivery operators, your posties, your parcel delivery people, your letter delivery people, whoever it is who's having to ring on people's doorbells, knock on their doors and collect money, they don't have to collect cash.
Yeah.
They can take payment by card. My goodness. We shouldn't actually have the doorstep surprise at all. But if you're going to have a doorstep surprise, at least make it a 21st century doorstep surprise. Anyway, it boggles my mind sometimes that we've made such advances in the postal sector. We've digitized so much. We've improved the lodgement process at the post office counter for those C2C international parcels, which can be, what kind of volume do they make up? I'm sure we've talked about it before. It's a small percentage of the volumes, but it's disproportionately complicated sometimes, isn't it? Because you're dealing with amateurs like me who don't know how to fill out a customs form daily. Anyway.
Yeah, and that, you know, this is the thing, is what people, you know, don't understand necessarily. And I always say, why would they? Is, you know, you've got your professional users, which kind of get the plot in terms of data's key. But, you know, somebody walking into a postal retail counter, they're just sending something, right? They don't necessarily understand the implications of not having the data. And we're working very closely with a number of the postal operators, and actually our software is now in a lot of the postal operators' counters, right? So that can be done automatically. Because to your point, is there's two things: is the doorstep surprise, which, you know, you're right to rant about it because we all rant about it.
I rant about it frequently.
But
anyway,
but the equally that's really important is, you know, is it the right stuff? Are you actually, is stuff coming into the country that, you know, is allowed? Right? Is stuff coming onto an aeroplane that's allowed? You know, I talked to you, I think, a while back about those military heated dinners that you know, one of them went off in an aeroplane because it's now post-COVID, it's become a camping thing, right? It's one of those heated dinners, you pull a tab and it heats it up, and that went off on an aeroplane. Now that is pretty scary. Right, so it's all about, you know, people often look about, you know, cross-border it's all about governments and everybody trying to, you know, get all the money, but it's also about security, our security. It's also about making sure that there isn't illicit trade in animal products, right? You know, we're very much now concentrating quite heavily on, you know, CO2 sustainability data that will come into play. Ethical employment data will come into play. You know, so as I said to you right at the beginning, it's not about, you know, putting up barriers. It's about actually just being visible and you know, compliant, if you like, for want of a better word, and responsible. And I think it is. You know, it is one of those things that is about, you know, responsible trade, and everybody supports responsible trade. It's the illicit stuff that you know, muddies the waters for everybody.
David, we could keep going on about this, and I know that we sort of encourage each other a little bit when it comes to ranting and raving about international postal matters. But I think you've made a really good point there. It's not just about, you know, numpties like me who complain about paying a fee to receive their own parcels. The security and safety aspect of this is huge. There's even the things like counterfeiting and things like that, which are all sort of bundled up all in this this global fight against illicit drugs, counterfeiting, things like that. And there are numerous global bodies as well, David, as we all know, that are taking a close look at this as well and trying to fight all of that whilst not killing global trade. Anyway, let's not go into a philosophical discussion about global trade though, David, because, well, how long have we got, as we often say? If people want to find out more about Hurricane and your cross-border e-commerce tools, the website address, I'll tell you, David, it's hurricanecommerce.com, and I'll stick a link on the episode page on the postalhub.com as well. So if anybody wants to find out more about what David and the team are up to, you click through there to their website and you get in contact with someone from Hurricane to tell you more. David Spottiswood, co-founder of Hurricane, thank you very much for joining us on the Postal Hub podcast today.
Thanks, Ian. Merry Christmas.
Coming in 2024 on the Postal Hub podcast, we have Mustafa Tonguç, the Managing Director Germany at DHL Express. Kate Muth from IMAG will join us to talk about developments in international mail. Luke Lloyd from the IPC will discuss emissions reduction and some findings from the IPC's emissions measurement program. We have many other great speakers coming for you. Sounds threatening, doesn't it? Coming in 2024. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast to get all of these episodes downloaded to the platform, the player, the whatever of your choice, so you can listen to these as they are released. Sign up for my sign up for my email newsletter. It's a worry, isn't it, everyone? Sign up for my email newsletter. Go to thepostalhub.com and you can get an email every time I release a new episode. Follow me on LinkedIn. Follow the Postal Hub podcast on LinkedIn. And what else can you do? Just enjoy the fact that the peak season is over and brace yourself for the onslaught of e-commerce returns. I'm Ian Kerr. Thanks for listening in and look forward to your company next year on the Postal Hub podcast.